Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Joke Rogers. Nearly 6 million people have been internally displaced within Sudan since April when the war began, while 1.2 million have fled to neighboring countries like Chad, Egypt, South Sudan, Ethiopia, and the Central African Republic. However, there are reports of ethnic cleansing by the Rapid Support Forces and allied militias in Sudan's Darfur region, causing people to flee the renewed violence into neighboring Chad.
Hundreds of thousands of displaced Sudanese fleeing are struggling to find shelter, with many people sleeping under trees by the roadside. People fleeing to Chad reported a new surge in ethnically driven killings in Sudan's west, Darfur, as the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces (RSF) took over the main army base in the state capital, El Geneina. Women were seen weeping as they received the news that their family members were killed in the violence back home.
Our people there in Admata were killed and displaced. Children are slaughtered. Women's money and belongings are robbed, and they can't escape.
The United Nations Refugee Agency is very concerned about them not having access to food, shelter, and clean drinking water.
The situation is dire. We're lacking shelter, we're lacking water, we're lacking food, and all of the UN, the NGO community is coming together, but it's simply not sufficient for the needs. We are so concerned. You're talking about 6 million people that have been displaced, both inside Sudan as well as in all of the neighboring countries, and that because of a conflict that can be stopped. We need a ceasefire. We need a political solution so that these people can go home safely and go back to school, go back to their jobs, and start their life again. This simply cannot continue.
Meanwhile, the executive director of the United Nations Population Fund, Natalia Kanem, speaks about the situation in Chad.
Chad today faces multiple challenges and a humanitarian emergency. Instability, violence in neighboring countries, and the disproportionate impact of a climate crisis, not of its own making, not to mention socioeconomic and other development challenges. Despite being one of the poorest countries in the world, Chad now hosts more than 1 million refugees, including newly some 500,000 who fled the conflict in Sudan over the past 6 months, most women and children. Many of the women are victims of gender-based violence in the countries that they fled and or in the camps where they're now living. In my visit to a UNFPA-run one-stop center for violence survivors in Mundu in the south of Chad on Friday, I spoke to girls and young women who shared heartbreaking stories of pain and suffering.
According to the International Organization for Migration, the war in Sudan has caused a major humanitarian crisis and the displacement of more than 6 million people. Schools have also been shut for the last 7 months as displaced people find temporary shelter inside the classrooms. The education and the future prospects of millions of children in Sudan are also at risk.
The VOA's Nairobi Bureau Chief, Mariama Diallo, joins us now for more. Hello, Mariama. Good to see you again today.
Thank you for having me. It's very sad to watch those images.
Yes, certainly. So what more can you tell us regarding the ethnic killings in the Sudanese region of Darfur?
Well, obviously, the images are heartbreaking, and people fleeing the Darfur area, the accounts that we've been hearing from all of those people talk about a dire situation. Obviously, there are some unverified reports, basically that, the people from of Masale descent, basically the majority ethnic African tribe, that is the majority in El Geneina, is basically talking about being targeted by our militias as the war continues between the RSF, the Rapid Support Forces, and the Sudanese army. 8 organizations are talking about that. Also, that people who are fleeing that area, the Darfur area, the numbers have increased. As you can see, the UN HCR official who recently was traveling in the region, Dominic Hyde, talked about basically just stories of unimaginable humanitarian crisis. So yes, that's all the stuff that we've been hearing coming out of the region at this point. Obviously, there have been a lot of competing other crises in the world, and sometimes Sudan is not getting the attention that it needs, but certainly the recent resurgence and of fighting and people fleeing is a reminder that the war is not over, and it is ongoing in Sudan.
Is the Rapid Support Forces now in control of Sudan, or a large part of the country, and has it publicly claimed responsibility for the attacks?
Well, there are no indications at this point that the Rapid Support Forces are controlling the whole country. Obviously, there are reports that they are taking, the group has taken over, for example, an army base in the Darfur area. But there are no, solid reports that they are in control of the whole country. There are no claims either. Like, I haven't seen that yet, that the Rapid Support Forces have not been claiming, being the ones basically who have been committing these atrocities in that Darfur region. Although you hear a lot of reports that are coming out and accounts from people who have just been fleeing the area, talking about who the attackers are. But it's hard to verify, is it the Sudanese army or is it the Rapid Support Forces at this point?
And the renewed killings have caused thousands to flee to neighboring Chad, as well as other countries. Are we about to witness another mass displacement or refugee crisis, just like we saw at the start of the war in April?
Well, from what we've seen in the past few weeks with reports from 8 organizations, when you have the UNHCR official who had visited some of the areas affected, by the war, whether it's neighboring Sudan or places in Sudan, there is certainly an indication that what was happening in the beginning, where you had just large numbers of people fleeing the conflict and landing mostly into Chad, because that's the country we've been hearing the most about. But don't forget that there are other neighboring countries. You have people who are going to South Sudan. You have people going to Ethiopia, the Central African Republic, and other places trying to get into Egypt. So yes, I think according to reports and what we've seen recently, it looks like renewed fighting or fighting that never stopped, because just people who are not talking about it are creating kind of a new, just like increasing numbers of people who are trying to leave the country.
Are the mediation talks shaky? How are they panning out, going by the renewed fighting that has broken out? Any hope for ceasefire, do you think?
Well, I think what came out of the talks, the Jeddah talks, the new ones sponsored by Saudi Arabia, the United States, and IGAD, the intergovernmental group, the East African bloc that has been representing the African Union. Basically, what came out of that was not ceasefire. In fact, the communique, and I'm going to just look at it real quick and say that the communique that came out of the recent meetings in Jeddah talked about the co-facilitators, which are the three groups that I just, the two countries and the IGAD group that I just mentioned, talked about, regretting that the parties were unable to agree on ceasefire implementation arrangements during this first round of talk. What came out of it is that I think that an announcement that the Sudanese armed forces and the RSF had committed basically to facilitate the delivery of humanitarian assistance and maybe build toward a permanent cessation of hostilities. But there are no indications at this point that at least working toward the cessation of hostilities is happening at this point.
And just before I do let you go, give us a picture of, what Sudan is like away from the Darfur ethnic killings. I mean, this conflict has dragged on for more than 6 months now. How are people coping and carrying on with their day-to-day activities? Well, those who are still around, those who are still, they don't have anywhere to go.
I mean, that's an absolutely a great question, and I'm going to answer that. I'm actually going to go back to the UNHCR official who recently visited the area, who talked about that basically only 39% of the $1 billion that was needed to provide humanitarian assistance for Sudanese people fleeing the country, only 39% of that $1 billion has been raised. And then there was a separate $2.6 billion appeal to help the 18 million people who are in Sudan, who are stuck inside, basically, the internally displaced or people who are dealing with the war. And on that, basically, maybe 1/3 of that has been raised. So you can only imagine, and since the war started, while the war was going, you had the competing other war in Ukraine. But since April, we've seen new wars that started, like the war in Gaza between Israel and the Palestinians. So I can only imagine what the people are going through at this point, inside and outside of Sudan.
Mariama, thank you for that update.
Thank you so much for having me.
Welcome back. We're learning that the British High Commission in Uganda is warning of a growing terror threat, which includes dangers targeted at foreigners in the country. This security alert is coming hours after the United States Embassy issued a similar one. Both diplomatic missions warned their citizens against attending large gatherings, including worship activities. They also cautioned against participation in music and cultural festivals ahead of the popular Nyege Festival on Thursday. Uganda has experienced heightened insecurity in recent months. In June, Allied Democratic Forces, the militant group, killed 42 people at a school in western Uganda, one of the deadliest ADF attacks in the country. And as widespread fighting between the Ethiopian army and local militias continues in restive Amhara region, residents are accusing the government forces of drone strikes and indiscriminate shelling. According to the residents, heavy weapons and drones are being used in the clashes, creating concern for the safety of civilians. In one district, witnesses say 5 people attending a funeral were reportedly injured when an artillery shell hit a place nearby. Another resident said airstrikes hit a school. However, an ongoing internet shutdown imposed by the authorities since August, when the clashes broke out, has made it difficult to independently confirm the allegations of violence. The death toll from flash floods in Somalia has risen to 29, with several others injured and affected by the disaster. The head of the National Disaster Management Agency, Mahmoud Molim, says about 850,000 people are estimated to have been affected by the heavy flooding, and over 113,000 people are now displaced. Earlier this week, the government of Somalia declared a state of emergency in the most affected states, Jubaland, Harshbel, Southwest, and Galmudug. The flooding began last month after heavy rains raised water levels and caused the overflowing of the Juba and Shabelle. Meanwhile, a United Nations-supported meeting has been held in Somalia's capital, Mogadishu. The gathering, tagged Global Open Day on Women, Peace and Security, gave women in Somalia an opportunity to engage with political leaders, policymakers and international partners on issues relating to political participation. The United Nations Secretary General's representative for Somalia, Katrina Liang, expressed the challenges Somali women face in political participations, as well as highlighted the achievements.
In terms of theory to practice, our theme, there was sadly a slight decline in the number of women parliamentarians from 24% we achieved in 2016 to 21%. But on the good news side, for the first time in history, we have the first Deputy Speaker of the House of the People is a woman, Ms. Sadia Yazin Haji Samata. And furthermore, women members of the 11th Federal Parliament did secure leadership positions as chairs, deputy chairs, members of committees and whips. So definitely some progress. Well, on the 30%, frankly, this has to be enshrined in law. It's great to have the commitment, but without a legally bound commitment, we know from experience in other countries it's really, really hard to make progress. And the countries in Africa that have done the best have got these kind of quotas enshrined in laws. The National Consultative Council, with no representation from women, really cannot be seen to be addressing the concerns of the country. So we absolutely must make sure the voice of women is heard at that top forum, the NCC. Women are the route to solving these conflicts. So we need you at the grassroots and at all the levels up, acting as peacemakers. So let's also remember to try and hear the voice of women.
And we're now in South Africa, where the country's transport minister, Sindiswe Chikunga, was robbed at gunpoint in a daring attack while traveling on Monday. Addressing the incident, the country's police minister, Becky Sele, says criminals have declared war on citizens. Mr. Sele said, in his words, "We nearly lost the minister that would have been shot and killed. People say we are calling for a war. We are not calling for a war. We found the war in the way. These criminals, they are taking us on, so it's no use taking a step back." The minister said the government would address police shortages in the country in an attempt to curb the escalating crime rates. 17 Zambian opposition MPs have been suspended from Parliament for 30 days. The move comes as the members of Parliament disrupted the House session last week, with House Speaker Nelly Muti describing the MP's behavior as a breach of House rules and, of course, integrity. The lawmakers defied orders to leave the plenary after they accused the Speaker of denying them an opportunity to speak. Ms. Muti said that lawlessness should not be confused with freedom of expression and defined the Speaker amounted to an assault on Zambia's constitutional democracy. In Nigeria, the maritime industry and the Director General of the Nigerian Maritime Administration and Safety Agency, Dr. Bashir Jamo, wants the media to change the global perception of Nigeria's maritime industry. According to him, positive reportage of the maritime industry will enhance the country's global ranking and create an opportunity for her to benefit from the 350 million jobs and $3.5 trillion revenue accruable from the blue economy globally. Dr. Jamo stated this while declaring open a 5-day training of maritime and defense reporters on maritime security in Lagos.
The major factor that will bring us together to ensure that we have peace and harmony within 72% of the world body of water is cooperation, coordination, collaboration, communications among the member countries. If Nigeria is having headache, and then Ghana will naturally start having PIBA in terms of our business with this water. The IMB report shows that the experiences of maritime insecurity, the successes recorded is about, since 1993, we have never recorded such successes. You go on Google, you find out that. So this is a yielding result, and we are happy. So we can't continue to go and sleep. We have to continue to collaborate, and we have to get people like you to inform the international community that this is what we are doing, and we will continue to do it, and we are not sleeping. We will no longer go to bed until when we ensure that peace and tranquility, continue to be maintained within our own waters.
And finally on the program, as Israelis mark 1 month since the October 7th attack by Hamas, the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, began a visit to the Middle East country and the region. Mr. Turk, who is in Egypt, condemned the ongoing war and called for a solution to the conflict. He's, however, expected to visit the Rafah border crossing before traveling to the capital of Jordan, Amman.
It's the 1 month anniversary of this incredible escalation of violence that we have seen. I'm, of course, from a human rights perspective, extremely worried about the situation, about what is happening, and it is really important that a solution is found to end the violence and to get out of this horrible, horrible humanitarian and human rights situation for what's happening in Gaza.
That's Network Africa today. Thank you for watching. I'm Joker Rogers.